Now here. So the Nietzsche seminar from the Universidad Complutense is also an associated partner of the project, and I'm very glad that they intervened for the first time in the framework of Metabody.
Good.
They are very worried about their English, but something make them confident that it's not a problem.
Okay, then good afternoon, and firstly we would like to thank Jaime and Eva for the invitation to participate in this conference, as well as to all the participants and to the assistants for your presence today here. Laura and I are members of the Seminario Nietzsche Complutense, a research group to investigate and divulgate the thought of Nietzsche at the Faculty of Philosophy in the Complutense of University of Madrid, which was invited a few months ago to collaborate as partner with Metabody project. Maybe there are people here wondering about Nietzsche's role, an author of the late 19th century, could play in a project as innovative as Metabody. We think that Nietzsche is one of the most important thinkers for the 20th century philosophy, and thanks to his thinking and new philosophical reflection on the body starts nowadays, and it makes possible with a new look at the body the development of new approaches and studies in fields like politics, art, or historical research, ethics, and so on. However, this new understanding of the body, as we will see now briefly, has his ground in something like a relational ontology of forces. This Nietzschean understanding of the reality based on the hypothesis or the idea that the world is the result. Pay attention, please. We say result and not principle or cause. The result of the permanent confrontation of many forces. That is the idea that Nietzsche named will to power, a continuous confrontation of dynamic forces which are always in motion and which are always changing. From an ontological point of view, we might think that then forces are those that constitute the ground, the origin of the world. Nevertheless, it is not possible to affirm this so fast. Nietzsche's philosophy is mostly focused on a critique of the metaphysical or dogmatic thought. The basic idea of this metaphysical thought, which has been dominant in Western philosophy and culture for the last 2,500 years, has tried to reduce the reality to a one and unique foundation, to a single ground that allows us to explain everything, what happens, and what allows us to distinguish between real things and apparent ones, and therefore between true things and false ones. We might say that Nietzsche doesn't accept that there are certain elements and conditions, that is to say, which don't depend ontologically on other elements, but which their ontological value come from themselves. But Nietzsche, as Deleuze said, Nietzsche was not interested so much in what things are, but in their value, the value of the things or the value of forces which constitute them. Certainly that also forces are also subject to this dynamic. They are not the original and the ground of the world, as if was a question of the first reality in the way of the metaphysics, but their value only makes sense in their contraposition with other forces. Then we can see that Nietzsche challenged the concept of identity, which is one of the fundamental ideas of the metaphysics. The things or the forces will have one value or another one with relation to what surround and constitute them. Nothing has unconditional character, but everything is the result or effect of a correlational confrontation. Well, Nietzsche transferred this approach to his interpretation of the body. For him, a body which is the result, the effect, the confrontation of force, that in this context, in the field of corporality, are called impulses, drives, or instincts. As it occurs with the forces, drives have no value by themselves, but they depend on the value of the drives or instincts that are contrasted to them. In Down, the text of Nietzsche, Nietzsche writes, in itself, like every instinct, it doesn't possess either this or indeed any other moral character and nay, or even a definite accompanying feeling or pleasure or displeasure. It doesn't get all these qualities at its second nature until it comes into contact with impulse which have already been baptized as good and evil, or has been recognized as the attribute of beings already weighed and valued by the people from a moral point of view. End of quote. Then Nietzsche says that any body is a set of forces opposed, while to a hierarchical system of instincts evaluating the nerve impulse that we receive. Through this hierarchical body, the individual is inserted into a society. For example, in the Gaia science, we can read, wherever we meet with a morality, we find evaluation and order of rank of the human impulses and activities. This valuation and orders of rank are always the expression of the needs of a community of head, that which is in the first place to its advantage, and in the second place and in the third place is also the authoritative standard for the work of every individual. By morality, the individual is taught to become a function of the herd and to ascribe to himself value only as a function. End of quote. Let's take a step forward. Nietzsche says that the body is nothing more than the result, remember this, of a certain relation of forces. Sorry. From this text, then, we can say that any kind of morality, any normative system, any cultural device, such as language, for example, can be understood as, and this is a concept important, we think, as instinctual economy. That is to say, as a system to enhances or weakens certain impulses, and through this it conforms bodies from certain social values, and this is important with the body as well. That is to say, with these values that we have embodied, we also interpret the world. Okay, the bodies act or carry out action from their body constitution, and with it they reproduce the values turned on a single moral, for example, Christianity. That moral is not good or evil by itself. It is only the imposed moral, those under which bodies are formed, while bodies that acting, they carry out a particular way of action and some specific values. Then, in summary, Nietzsche doesn't propose here that the body were now the new origin, unchanging, stable, and closed, because with it we will only replace a metaphysical principle by another one. What Nietzsche says is that we can't recognize the origin, understood it as a single principle, as the ground of everything, because origin is based on the correlational between at least two elements. Nietzsche's problem is not that a particular interpretation or evaluation of the world organizes the body, because the body always involves some structuration. The problem, according to Nietzsche, are certain typologies or instinctual forms of organization that give out every possibility of generate new interpretations, new structure, new lifestyle. Okay, some typologies you can do that. Then, up to there, we have seen an overview of Nietzsche's body conception. From it, how shall we understand the movement and gesture? In an entry in a notebook of 1885, Nietzsche says, quote, all movements must be understood as gestures, as a kind of language by which the forces are understood. End of quote. What does this sentence mean? Nietzsche says in this text that movements from our mechanistic understanding of the world are gestures, a kind of language, through which we get some understanding or simplified abstraction of the world. This knowledge allows us live in the dynamic forces that underlies to the reality and that he, as we said before, calls will to power. Then Nietzsche identified in this text gesture and language with movement. They are therefore choreographed movements, those that are symptoms and expression of a certain instinctual structure. Okay, these movements are certain instinctual structure which we have embodied through education. However, expect to access in terms of full adequation to the known thing is a fiction that Nietzsche denounced in his philosophy because it exceeds the limits of its possibilities. We have another text. The mechanistic concept of motion, writes Nietzsche, is already a translation of the original process into the signed language of sight and thought. The demand for an adequate mode of expression is senseless. It is of the essence of a language, a means of expression to express a mere relationship. The concept truth is non-essential. The entire domain of true false applies only to relations, not to an in itself. There is no essence in itself. It is only relations that constitute an essence, yet as there can be no knowledge in itself. End of the quote. In summary, as Nietzsche says, any mode of expression, both gestures as language, cannot, by science, adequate to the thing that it tries to express. Words, gestures, choreographed movements are instances which attempt to represent by fixed meanings what the thing is by itself, but in fact, what they express cannot be more than a mere relationships, a relationship between forces that, as we pointed out, is variable and changing, the opposite to what metaphysics intends as essence of the thing. On the basis of what we said so far, there are, very briefly, three questions arising from Nietzsche's ontology and relational conception of the body that we think that perhaps could be treated and researched further in the Metabody framework project and present in future proposals. Firstly, a large part of Nietzsche's work is dedicated to denounce the mechanism, tools, and strategies by which, at some stage, for example, Plato's philosophy, some stage an inversion occurs in our way of interpreting the world. The inversion led that the relations that till then were temporary, transitory, and dynamic, and Heraclitus, for philosophy, for example, shall become determined and established in its development exclusively from fixed values. These predetermined values adopt, therefore, from that moment a prescriptive way, and they begin to designate the meaning and significance of things as essential and fixed. In summary, Nietzsche's renounce focuses on the inversion because of values are no longer effects or results of variable relationships to become a structuring of relation element. This has important consequence, according to Nietzsche, because the will to power, the relational field which life depends, is reduced in this inversion in a permanent way to something previously set. We can find this argument or idea against the inversion in many places in Nietzsche's work, and referring to many aspects. For example, in morality, on the genealogy of morality, this inversion is called slave revolt. Slave revolt, which is the movement by which an interpretation, called by Nietzsche weak, becomes dominant. Doing that, this inversion instills the unconditional conditional dichotomy as a value, as a way to separate the most and the less valuable, so that it collapses the flux of becoming, flux that, according to Nietzsche, should characterize life. We can find other examples of this inversion also in the language sphere, in the consolidation of the use of the subject predicates grammar structure, or in the inversion because of the creator of language, who puts names to the things when conceptually defines his own experience. A poet, for example, is replaced by the user of language, the user or the creator, the user of language who conform his experience from the names, roles, language, or movements already created by another people. Through and lies in a non-moral sense, Nietzsche writes, the thing in itself, which is precisely what the pure through apart from any of its consequence will be, is likewise something quite incomprehensible to the creator of language, and something not in the least worth striving for. The creator only designates the relation of things to men, and for expressing these relations he lays hold of the boldest metaphors. End of quote. Nietzsche denounced a fourth example of inversion. It could be the attempt against a continuous flux conception of the mechanistic physics of mathematizing the nature, that it must be submitted to certain laws. The naturalizing discourse will be, therefore, a conceptual tool that produce an inversion in our perceptions. Okay, the second aspect that we would like to briefly note is that Nietzsche thinks the body as the place from which emanates all the thoughts, feelings, and volitions. But within its inner working, it turns completely unknowable to us in a strict sense. All language, all expressions form is a metaphor. It's a transposition of those that exceed exceed our consciousness. The philosophical implication of such approach exceeds our time here, now, but we would like to show one short text to give us an idea of the radicalism and the depth of the Nietzsche's thought and critique. It must be shown to what extent everything conscious remains on the surface, how an action and the image of an action differ, how little one knows of what precedes an action, how fantastic are our feelings or freedom of will, cause and effect, how thoughts and images are like words, only signs of thoughts, the inexplicability of every action, the superficiality of all praise and blame, how essential fiction are and concepts are in which we deal consciously, how all our words refer to fiction, and how the bond between man and man depends on the transmission and elaboration of these fictions. Okay, then the third point, finally, we are going to show very quickly how the most radical Nietzschean proposal must be materialized in an embodied wisdom and a unconsciously knowledge, a knowledge that should be instinctive. In another text, in another note, Nietzsche writes, by far the greater number of motions have nothing whatever to do with consciousness, not with sensation. Sensations and thoughts are something extremely insignificant and in relation to the countless number of events that occur every moment. On the other hand, we perceive that purposiveness rules over the smallest events that is beyond our understanding. Planning, selectivity, coordination, reparation, etc. In short, we discover an activity that will have to be ascribed to a far higher and more comprehensive intellect man than we know of. We learn to think less highly of all that is conscious. Put briefly, perhaps the entire evolution of the spirit is a question of the body. It is a history of the development of a higher body that emerged into our sensibility. Okay, in conclusion, we have tried to present in this paper two visions of movement. On one hand, the mechanistic, which is inserted within a concept we have called metaphysics, characterized by their need to express themselves in terms of substance, subject, atoms, supposedly fixed movement or gestures, that finally concerns to their possibility to represent the world in terms of truth or wrong. On the other hand, we have tried to show that Nietzsche proposed a relational and dynamic ontology. A gesture, a movement, no longer, therefore, is for him a sign of or synthesizer language that, once fixed, embodied by social practice, is reproduced individually and socially, constituting subject. As we have seen, fiction and imagination are for Nietzsche instances which allow us structuring forces and drives to generate constantly new meanings, new interpretation, new perspective, and new lifestyles. In other words, art, broadly understood, is no more than an expression of a counter-movement that plays the creator body versus the explainer reason. Thank you.